So an important point Mr. Taneja made, Jayant, is the fact that that India has zero capability as of now, experience rather, in terms of manufacturing electric hardware. So because of the government's push, it does portend that there could be some short-term disruption as far as our local manufacturing is concerned. How do we overcome that, if at all?
Well, the example that Ashok gave was true when it comes down to electronic hardware and so on and so forth, but doesn't mean that we can't do this in the future. Electric mobility per se has moved off from traditional ways of doing things. So there are a number of startups now. You have somebody like a Tesla who comes out of nowhere, builds up a market cap which is more than the gurus of the industry of Ford and General Motor Corporation in no time at all. You have Googles of the world. You have people in India who've never made cars who are coming in and saying. So the maturity of available module technology to build electric cars can be brought in very, very quickly. And at the same time, if we can get government support, and when I say support, we mean stable policy. I'm not asking for SOPs here. Then in terms of long-term predictability, it becomes easier because the effective cost of ownership or the cost of kilometer being driven is likely to is being estimated at 1/10 of that of an IC engine. If that be the case, bring in shared mobility, bring in new technologies, you would typically have transportation costs going down drastically. So if you were to step outside of us today, who are stakeholders in the transportation industry, and you were to talk to somebody on the road, a young person who doesn't want to buy a car, he wants transport to go from here to there. And if that transport can be used by many others in shared mobility, which is run pollution-free, non-dependence on fossil fuels, no carbon footprint, I think he'd be a very excited man. Give it to him cheaper. And I think you have a recipe for success for everyone, including the country as a whole. We in India are probably one of the most polluted countries in the world. So something needs to be done there.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it was a Morgan Stanley report which said that by 2025, India will be one of the world's largest, in fact, I think the largest market as far as shared mobility is concerned. So clearly there is, there's a lot of opportunity. And perhaps, Vinny, that is the key point. We cannot see electrification in isolation. We need to see it also, we need to connect it to the larger trends of autonomous driving, shared mobility. So what are some of the key things that, that you think government needs to do ASAP to really incentivize industry to put in the money?
Well, our school of thought at ACMA is, the government ought to be encouraging R&D. That's very critical if we want to leapfrog and be a strong player in the technology area. The automotive industry in India today spends just about 0.5% of their turnover on R&D. That's paltry compared to what a developed country would be spending. Germany would be spending something like 4 to 5%, whether it's US, whether it's Japan, they all are in that range. So the point is we need to really up our spend on R&D. We need to incentivize productization in the country. We also need a lot of encouragement to industry-academia interface that's really, really non-existent. Only now we see some odd centers of excellence coming up with the industry and IITs participating together, but that needs to be upscaled. So that's one area where if one thing that I would want the government to do today is really help us do more R&D, more productization, and the vehicle industry and the component industry also need to be working together, the component industry needs to be involved right at the development stage, including EVs, right? We will have, as Jan said, startups and stuff coming up, So the component industry also needs to be involved there, So then only the industry will be able to absorb and move on to the next level.
So I'll give you the last word then. I know there's a whole host of, there's I think a tsunami of, information flowing in, what the Indian government really needs to do as it sort of makes this big switch. But if you were to pick one country as a model from where, which could be perhaps be a good case study for India, if you were the advisor, for the Indian government, let's say, let's give you the hot seat. If you were the advisor to the Indian government and you had to tell them, study the model that this country came up with, perhaps that is what, maybe some of the policy decisions that they had taken, we could do well to actually learn from there. Which country would that be?
So, to answer a little bit longish version, I think there are two parts to this question. One is there are some good things which you should pick up, and I would maybe pick, Norway, for instance, which has really figured out, what is the end state that they're looking from a regulation perspective, and they're also looking at what additional incentives, subsidies, etc., are required, and how will that evolve, right? That is one. But I would say that India really needs to look at it independent of any country in India, because there are very unique challenges in India, right? What is the car density? What is the driving mix? Can you get facilitators? You said that these problems are also interlinked, right? You can't just talk about electric mobility. It is driven a lot by shared mobility. Autonomous drives shared mobility as well. So, there are a lot of factors which go together, which other countries have in sync, which India doesn't. So I think you need to look at this on a standalone basis and say what it takes. What does it mean for the ecosystem, for the OEMs and the component manufacturers? So you do need to look at it separately, but you do need to pick up some of the good things that some of the other countries have done as well.
So pick and choose is what you're saying. Mr. Taneja, final words.
Yeah. I also believe that we cannot emulate the West. We cannot just bring what happened in Norway or in Denmark or is happening in Sweden or even happening in the United States directly to India. It won't work. Just to give an example, in China, they are giving a subsidy of $9,000 per car, per electric vehicle. That translates into the price of a mid-sized sedan on the road in India. Can we ever emulate that model? No. We need to pick up best practices from 2-3 countries and then evolve our own India-specific model. Example, Japan laid out a very clear policy as they adopted hybrid vehicles. First, they went and said all the taxi segment in Tokyo City and then other big cities would completely go hybrid. This made, what is a hybrid vehicle? It has an IC engine and the vehicle is running on a battery for part of the time. It is a mini electric vehicle some of the time. In this process, they gained the know-how, then they applied it to service vehicles for transporting goods within the city, and so on and so forth. And then Japan has taken the next route, which is, I think they're trying to go the hydrogen fuel cell route, keeping in view their concerns about availability of lithium and other issues. But notwithstanding that, they developed a Japan-specific policy. Look at Germany and the rest of Europe. They are trying to create common standards. There are common fuel efficiency norms. By regulation, they are supposed to hit certain CO2 levels within given periods of time. And this is laid out for the next 10, 15 years in advance. They can make investments for all this. Right. It does not prevent electric mobility to happen faster. If it becomes more affordable, it will naturally happen. But there is a very clear milestone. There's a clear roadmap. There's it is technology agnostic. And we need to learn from this and maybe evolve our own model for India.
Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the CNBC-TV18 special. So the verdict is very clear. Industry is ready for the, for the big electric move. But what they are really hoping for is a clear roadmap from the government. From all of us here, thanks very much for watching this special.